Hello, Steve Lensley. Welcome to my video on how I made Hannah's hope chest. My friend Ellen asked me if I would make her daughter Hannah a hope chest for her 18th birthday, so I was happy to agree to do that. We went back and forth a little bit on the design and the color and whatnot, and this is what we came up with. So after we agreed on the design or whatever, I just made a quick sketch. It was pretty straightforward build. It's basically a box with a lid and a base and some molding. So it's pretty straightforward. It's bigger than most projects that I built, so it took quite a bit of room in the shop with all the, given the size, which was, I think the top was 46 inches long and it was about 20 some inches wide and like 22 or 24 inches tall. So it turned out to be it turned out really nice. It turned out to be a good project. The challenge for me on building the box was I decided to use miter corners instead of like dovetails or something. So doing those and getting good tight miters on a piece this size to me personally was a challenge. So I was glad I was able to do that. I got a little gabby in the video and it wound up being longer than I wanted, so I split it into two pieces. The first part is how I made the box, and then the second part is how I made the base, the molding, the lid, and then put some finish on it. So if you enjoy part one, please go ahead and watch part two, which is also posted here on my channel. So without any further conversation, let's go ahead and let me show you how I made Hannah's hope chest. Okay, here's the wood for this project. It's cherry. I picked it up at my hardwood supplier, West Penn Hardwoods. I'll put a link to their website in the comments. I've already started milling some of it up. I probably have more than I need, but I'd rather have extra than wind up a board short when I get to the end of the project. So it's some pretty nice stuff, so we're going to go ahead and mill it up and start gluing up some panels to make this hope chest. Here's the panel I'm going to use for the front of this hope chest. It's made up of 3 boards. I picked the board that I liked. I picked 3 boards that had similar color match, and then I picked the grain of the one that I liked the most, and I made that the center board. It's a little wider than the 2 on the outside because I've trimmed them down to get to the width that I want. But before I did trim, I lined them up so I got a good grain match between the boards, and once I put some glue on it and clamp it up, you'll never know that there's a seam there. The rough width is 20.5. It's going to be 20 inches final width, but I'm not going to do that until I get everything all glued up. Then I'll cut all the panels at the same time. What I did was, to make this panel, I took the boards that I had and I cut the pieces out of the middle, and then I labeled each end. I don't know if we can see that there, probably not, but it's got a number on it. And then I cut the other side piece off the end of the board. So what'll happen is when I make this match, it'll go around the corner. I'm going to use a miter joint. It'll go around the corner and I'll have a good grain match. I'll trim this board to the same width as this one, so that when it goes around the corner, it'll be a nice grain match along the side. Now, the back panel won't match, but then again, generally the back panel of a chest like this is either up against the bed or up against the wall or something, so you won't see it. But so anyway, that's the panel. I'm not going to use any biscuits or anything on this. I think I got a nice match. I put some clamps on it. The boards are all the same thickness, and I think with the glue that we're using, which is Tight Bond 3 or whatever they call it now. What do they call it? Yeah, it's Tight Bond 3. It'll be plenty strong. So so this panel is ready to glue up after I'm going to trim the ends a little bit. Then I'll go ahead and glue it up. So all the panels are going to be made pretty much the same way. One of my least favorite things is sanding. I'm not quite sure that there's anybody that really likes it, but unfortunately it's a necessary evil. This is the inside of the back panel for the hope chest. It's been glued up yesterday, so everything's nice and dry. I'm always looking for ways, if I have to sand, to make sure that the end product or the end result comes out the way I want it. And what I don't want is I don't want to sand this thing, think I have all the glue off, and then next thing you know, when I go to put some finish on it, there's a glue spot that shows up. So one of the tricks that I learned from Charles Neal, who's a woodworker in Virginia, and he has a website, and I'll put a link down below in the comments, was he uses what's called a trace coat. So what I have some watered down dye. This just happened to be a brown dye of some sort. And I thinned it way down with water. So the idea is you put on a coat, you let it dry, and then when you sand it, you sand it off, and you'll be able to see if there's any imperfections and whatnot. So let's go ahead and put some on. There's no trick to this. This is not the final version or whatever, so it's just a matter of getting it on, just using a foam brush, putting it on, and getting good coverage on everything, and then that's pretty much all there is to that. So let's get this on. All right. So now we'll let that dry. It'll take a little while for it to dry. What I did was I already put some on the other side. So when it dries a lot lighter, of course. So the idea now is just to sand, and you can see where the glue is in this thing. And what also helps me, I run these boards through the drum sander before I glued them up, and I had 80 grit on the drum sander, so it leaves some pretty heavy grooves. Putting the trace coat on helps me be able to see those and make sure I sand and get them all off. I start with 80 grit on my random orbit sander, and then I go to 120, and then that's all I'll do until I get ready to finish sand it. After I do the joinery and everything. So then after that, I'll come back again with 120, clean up any marks or any pencil marks or anything that I put on it. And then I usually finish with 180. So it's a matter of sanding. So let me sand here for a minute. I'll mute the sound so you're not go deaf from listening to me sand, because I have the sander on a vacuum. So let's just sand a couple of these joints here, and I'll show you how it works. So the dye doesn't penetrate in very deep, and it's easy enough to sand off. And you can see once you sand it, there's some glue and stuff down here. And it'll also help you if the joints are not actually even. You can see you sand till the color's gone, but that works pretty well. So I generally do this on large panels. I don't do it on smaller pieces, but on the large panels where I've got to glue up, I like to use a trace coat. So I'll get back to sanding, and we'll get ready to do some joinery on this project. Let me get you caught up here. We have the panels for the case, the cherry panels, glued up and sanded to 120. There's a front and a back, and then the two side panels. They came out pretty nice. The joints look good, so I've been debating on how to put this case together, and I've decided on mitered corners, which are, at least to me, have been intimidating for a case this size, but we're going to give it a shot. I made it a big table saw sled, so hopefully we can get those miters cut the way they need to be so that the case goes together nice. One thing I'm going to do, these panels are still all oversized, so before I start cutting them to width or whatever and length, I'm going to put a groove in the bottom for the bottom panel, which is a aromatic cedar. I spent the last few hours milling up this lumber and gluing up the panel and sanding it to 120, and I feel like I've been living in the bottom of my grandmother's cedar chest, because it gets a little overpowering when you're milling some of this lumber, especially as much as I had to work on here. So, but it came out nice, and one thing about cedar, it certainly has a lot of character with all the knots and everything in it. Of course, this bottom panel won't have any finish on it, so we want the cedar smell to come up into the hope chest and keep those nasty moths and things out of the items that are being stored in it. So next thing I'm going to do is get a dado blade in the saw, and then we're going to go ahead and cut the groove in the bottom of these cherry panels. About the only thing I can do is mess that up is, one, cut it on the wrong side or the top. Cut it on the top instead of the bottom, or cut it on the outside rather than the inside. So I'm going to be very careful about marking the spot where that groove is going to go. So we'll get set up and take care of that next. Well, like I said, I'm going to use a dado blade to cut the groove in the bottom of these panels. So I like to run the panel through twice just to make sure that the piece stayed down to the table saw top, and that the groove is consistent depth. So I'll do it once, and then I'll run it through again just to make sure everything is the way I want it to be. Okay, I'm going to cut the miters on the end of these panels. What I have is I got my crosscut sled. I screwed a cleat to the inside here so that I'm holding this piece up against the fence. There's a hold down on this side to hold that side down, and then I'll put this cleat, I'll clamp this cleat on this side to hold this side down. Last thing I want to do is mess up these miter cuts after all this effort. So let's get the piece in position, slide it over. And I cut the miter on this cleat so I know where the blade's going to cut. So we'll give ourselves a little extra room there. And like that, we'll hold this clamp down. And we'll make sure these are down. We'll put some clamps on it. When I get ready to cut the panels to length, I'll use this this fence here or this cleat. I'll clamp a stop block on the end of it at the right distance, and I'll be able to cut those pieces to length. So right now is just cutting the first miter. All right, we're ready. Let's give that a shot. All right, there's the piece. We'll get this thing off here. And there you go. You probably can't see it, but we got a nice miter on the end of that. Nice miter on the end of that piece. So it's basically the same. It's the same process for all of them. Like I said, when I get ready to cut them to length, I'll put a stop block on that and be able to cut them to the right length. So Now, hopefully, I did spend a lot of time getting the blade to exactly at 45 degrees. I made a lot of test cuts before I actually committed to the piece. So hopefully it'll all go together the way it's supposed to. This is that panel flipped around, and I do have a stop block down on the other end of the fence there, so I can cut both of the front and back panels to the same length. Overall, it worked out pretty well. Gluing this up with the mitered joints is going to be a real nightmare unless we got a way to keep everything where it's supposed to be. So to do that, I'm going to use these number 20 biscuits. What I've done is I've measured, I got an old biscuit joiner. I've had it for a long time, and it's not something that I use very often, so I really can't justify buying a new one. So as long as this one works. This one, you put the fence you flip the fence over and it sets at 45 degrees. A lot of the newer ones actually clamp onto the thing the other way, which would have been a lot nicer, but this worked just as well. So what I've done is I measured from here to here and where it needs to be on the board, so I can make a mark to get all the biscuits in the same spot. So what I have is I have one centered, and I have one 3 inches from this end, and then I have one 2 inches from this end. So we're just going to go ahead and cut those. The only thing I could do wrong is if I put it too far down on the miter, it could actually go out through the other side. So I'm keeping them kind of high on the miter up in here someplace. So it's just a matter of lining up the since I don't have my little mark, I've been using this part of the fence is where I'm lining them up at. So it's just a matter of lining that up with my mark and getting everything where it's supposed to be. Turn it on. Here we go. There we go. We got our 3 number 20 biscuit slots. We'll put some biscuits in there, and like I said, I'm not really using them for to hold the pieces together, although they will do that. I'm just mainly using it for alignment, so that when I go ahead and put these pieces together, that the miters come out square, and makes it easier to clamp up. So I'll finish this up, and then we'll go ahead and get ready to do a dry fit. Gluing up a miter corner is always a challenge, but when it's wide as this one, which is 20 inches, it even becomes more of a challenge. One thing I saw on the internet, I think it was by Woodworker's Journal, it was a tip on how to glue up large miter joints. It was one of those short videos that they put out. And basically what they did was they glued clamping cauls to the outside of the case. It's a piece of plywood with a 45-degree miter cut on it, and you glue one on each side, and then you can clamp across from here to the other one, and that'll squeeze the joint together. What they did use is this hide glue by Titebond, and the advantage of using that is, one, is brittle, so you can pop off the plywood, and 2, it's water soluble, so you can clean off the excess glue on the inside. So it worked good on their video, which gave me the courage to make this miter joint to put this case together. So what I'm going to do is, it says the glue should set for 24 hours before you stress it. So what I'm going to do is glue these on now, and then tomorrow, or whenever probably not tomorrow, but I will, once I finish the inside of the case, then I'll be able to glue it together. I thought about just clamping these cauls on top and bottom, that way I wouldn't have to put any glue on it, but the problem is with this groove at the bottom of the case for the bottom, there's only a little 1/4-inch piece that you could clamp to there, so that wasn't going to work. So I'm going to have to go with the glue method here. So so what I'm going to do is I drew a line just a little inch and a quarter from the edge. And what we're going to do is just put this thing on here and clamp it on and let it dry. I'll put one on all 8 corners, and then that way when we get ready to glue it up, they'll be on there and all dried up and ready to go. So it's just a matter of taking the glue and putting a little on the, you don't want a lot, just putting a little on the caul to hold it. So I'm not going to put much more than that. Keep that standing up there. I've used this before to put cases and stuff together because it's got a long open time. So if you really need a lot of time, like putting a lot of dovetails or stuff together, that's high glue works pretty well. And with the new formulation and stuff they have, you don't have to have a pot to keep it hot and all that other stuff. So it actually works pretty well. I'm going to slide this out a little bit so I can get a clamp on it. Let's see. So we'll just put a clamp on there and keep it about where we want it. It's not critical exactly where it goes. Put something in the center here to clamp it down. And then one on the other end. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and put one of those on each of the other corners. Let it dry, and then once I can get some finish on the inside of this case, I can go ahead and glue it up. Okay, it's time to put this case together. I went ahead and pre-finished the inside of the box. The finishing regimen was, and there'll be more later, you probably can't see this very good, but it's blotch control by Charles Neal. Cherry has a tendency to blotch pretty bad, so I put a couple of coats of that on. Like I said, there'll be more about this later. The color is actually 2 parts of, one part this water-based espresso stain from General Finishes, and 1 part of their dye stain cinnamon. So you take 1 part of each together, and that's the color you get. And I finished it with this high-performance water-based top coat from the satin finish from General Finishes. So it came out pretty nice. I taped the inside corners here, so if we get any glue squeeze out, I got the bottom, cedar bottom, ready to go. So let's go ahead and get this set up and get ready to glue it up. All right, I had the case fit together. The other end is still in the clamp. I haven't glued that yet. I'm going to put some glue in this end, clamp it up, and then do the other end. So I want to keep everything square here. So it's just a matter of putting some glue. I'm using the glue I've been using in this project, Type Bond 3 Ultimate Wood Glue. Give me a little extra open time. If we can get it to come out, we'll put some glue on it. Let's see. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to spread the glue. I want to keep it mostly to the outside. This is kind of it's ingrained to some degree, but not totally ingrained because it's cut a miter on it. So while we want to keep some glue on the towards the inside, I don't want to deal with a lot of squeeze out. So this is going to suck this up really fast. So let me go ahead and get this on. I'm not going to put a lot on any on the biscuit slots. I'm just going to let the biscuits be mostly for alignment, but at the same time they'll get some glue on them when it goes together, and that'll help. So just going to go ahead and finish putting this glue on. All right, there's the glue. We'll put our biscuits in. Oop. I didn't want to go in there. And one more. All right. Let me put just a little bit of glue in the center of our groove to hold that panel in place. Not a lot though. That's the only place I'm going to glue it is on the ends. I got a little glue in there, which is not a good thing. Take a little sandpaper and sand that off. All right, let's get it glued on. Or let's get it put on. All right, we get some clamps on this. This is actually an excellent way of clamping up these miter joints. I just hope that I'll be able to get the plywood off when time comes. So we'll hope for the best on that. It should pop off, but we'll see. If I reach, I got a couple more clamps here. Pull this top piece together. Got good squeeze out along that joint. Put this top part on. All right. I think that's all the clamps I need. I got a nice tight joint on that. All right, so there's one end. I'll move to the other end and glue that up in a similar process, and we'll be good to go. Time to take these plywood cawls off of the case. If you remember, I put them on with hide glue, which is by nature brittle, so we should be able to drive this chisel underneath of the plywood and use the bevel on the chisel, and hopefully the plywood will give way instead of the case, which I've already taken a few of them off, and so I know, I'm pretty confident that that's going to be the case. Like I said, this is a tip that I saw on a little YouTube clip from Woodworker's Journal, so this is not something that I came up with on my own. So credit given where credit's due. So I'm going to take this chisel and give it a couple of whacks here, so it'll be a little bit noisy, so hopefully bear with me here. So once that chisel starts to come up, then I just take another chisel and move it down a little bit and give it a whack. And you can see that it's starting to pop off there, so we'll just work our way down. Pardon the noise here, sorry about that. All right, I want to resist the urge to pry up on this thing because I don't want to gouge the case. But I should be able to get this off here. No, not quite yet. There we go. So the plywood fails, which is fine. And then all I do is some of it will just pop off. I noticed a couple of on a couple of them. I probably put a little too much glue on. This one doesn't seem to be. This one doesn't seem to be too bad, but I just take a chisel and pry off some of the leftover plywood. Some of it'll pop right off. Like this big piece down here, that should come off easy enough. Down. Anyway, that's the general idea, and then just a matter of going back. A lot of the stuff will peel off with a chisel. I try and get all the plywood off as a minimum, so I just matter of scraping that off as much as I can with a chisel, and then I do come back with a cabinet scraper, scrape a little bit more, get more of it off. And it's not all going to come off, so then what I'll have to do is I'll get the random orbit sander and some 80 grit, take off most of it, and then sand a little bit more. The high glue is water soluble, so I'll check it, and if I need to, I'll take some water in a scratchy pad or something and try and get the rest of it off. I don't want to put too much water on the cherry and discolor it, so hopefully it'll all sand off. So that was actually a great way to glue up a mitered box of this size. I'm not sure I'd use it on something smaller, but for something this size, that certainly worked very well. So I'll get the rest of these off, sand it up, and we'll move on. Okay, that's the end of part one. So far I've got the box made up. It's time to go ahead and switch over to part two, where I show you how I made the rest of the piece and put some finish on it. So thanks for watching this part, and I'll look forward to you watching part two.